This is one I've been looking forward to, actually, and it's been touched upon a couple of times through the course of the day. Again, ties into the theme that we've been digging into, which is about responsibility and sustainability, and how can the Dutch market learn from some of the mistakes of others, specifically around responsible marketing. So I'd like to invite our moderator to the stage, Dan Waugh from Regulus Partners, and our two panelists, David Foster, Head of Regulatory Affairs at GVC Group, and Jaap Kalmer, who's the Chief Commercial Officer at SBC. Welcome to the stage, guys.
So one of the hot topics in gambling globally these days is the question of whether it is legitimate for sports to be used as a vehicle for encouraging people to gamble. In recent years, we've seen bans or significant curtailments or threats of curtailments in Italy, Spain, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and other territories. At the same time, there's a different direction of travel in other territories, particularly the USA, where sports betting is being opened up, and with that comes sponsorship and advertising. Like many of the issues that face the gambling industry, it's deeply complex, but public policy debate rarely allows for complexity. So that is why we're fortunate for the next 40 minutes or so, we've got two highly complex, highly brilliant panelists, and I might say highly glamorous panelists to help us cut through what's really going on here. And I say highly glamorous because on my left I have Jaap, who's probably got the most glamorous CV I've ever read. So Jaap is Chief Commercial Officer for Sports Global Group. Before that, he spent 3.5 years with AC Milan, also as Chief Commercial Officer. And before that, he spent 4 years at Ferrari as global brand director. And before that, he was at Unilever. So that's a pretty impressive CV. Further along, we have David Foster, who's Head of Regulatory Affairs at GVC. Before joining GVC, he was at Paddy Power, where he was Head of Regulatory Affairs, and was known as the second most handsome man at Paddy Power. It's on your own website, David. So,
I'll take it.
So a glamorous pair. What I asked them to do ahead of this session was to think with the Dutch market in mind and think of experiences in Italy, in Great Britain and other territories about one thing they would recommend that those participants in the market do, and one thing that they should not do as they look towards what might happen over here. So with that, I did have a little advert here that I want to show, and I know David's got an animation too. So this is...
Have a look at this bloke! We've sucked him in with $100 of bonus bets, and a year on, he's lost the house, the wife, and the kids. He can either gamble his way out of it like a legend, or seek professional help like a big fat soft cock. And look at this! He's using his last valid credit card and banging it on a multi. Broke Lad Sports 365. Give us your cash, fuckheads!
So I thought that was perhaps an amusing way to lead into the discussion about how a lot of people now perceive sports betting and its relationship with the sports. And I know David's got something he wants to show as well, but first, can I pass over to Jaap? And Jaap, can you give us your view of the things that should be done and shouldn't be done from a sports rights perspective, looking at this issue?
Well, I think it's from a sports rights holder's perspective.
Well, I suppose
general,
that's your...
As a do, or let's start with a don't. I've been living through the Italian situation. It's still ongoing as we speak because it hasn't come into effect yet. We definitely, as an industry, as a broader industry, but I would say especially the operators, we have to avoid that it gets that far, because you get to a point where things go out of control. And I think, either self-regulate or put yourself at the mercy of populist forces and populist logic, I think. And we have a pretty dreadful situation that is going to be very difficult to back out of in Italy right now. I live in Italy. So I think that's definitely might do. Let's get together and organize ourselves. We have examples where it can end up if we don't.
And when you say together, you mean the sports rights holders and the betting companies?
Yeah, I think this is mainly because, I mean, in the end, we're talking about, in my view, two main problems or two main areas of marketing when we're talking about sports and sports books or betting operators. On one hand, what's very visible is the sponsorship, the shirts and the LEDs and all of those visibility rights. But I would say that, and of course, when you look at the championship, where 17 or 18 clubs out of 24 have a sports brand on the shirt, on the jersey, that's kind of a sore in the eye. But I think the larger problem that creates in the end more of a reaction is in the advertising, the media advertising surrounding the matches, because the quantity of brands and the quantity of advertising that you see around the matches has just gone up to a level that that creates in Italy as of late, but that's going to stop now, and also in the UK, in Spain, and other countries, up to a level that society reacts. It is too big of a thing for people not to latch on to that and to become polemic about it and what have you. And we can talk about the merits of that, but the issue is there, I think.
Okay, so that's your don't and your do. Get together.
I'll roll them into one.
Yeah,
there
okay.
You go.
David, and I know you've got a little animation you want to show as well, but do you want to take us through your big tip for something that should stop and something that should start?
Yeah, I think I would say, largely picking up on what Jaap just said, I think as an industry we need to learn from the mistakes we've made in other jurisdictions, really, and try and find that right balance when it comes to marketing. I don't think, along with most other people, probably that an advertising outright ban is correct in the Netherlands when the market opens in 18 months time or so. But I think that right balance has to be struck. And it's incumbent upon the operators prior to market opening to get together and look at what steps can be taken to try and find that right balance. And again, working with the rights holders, working with the broadcasters, because we kind of can't do this in isolation. It needs to take a collaborative effort across the piece, really. So I think that would be my do, would be make sure we kind of get it right this time. I think the Netherlands is going to be really under the spotlight. I think it's the next big jurisdiction that's going to kind of open up in Europe, and I think it's I don't want to say our last chance, but we've had a few chances already and maybe not quite got it right. Now is the time to show the whole of Europe and further afield that actually we've learned from our mistakes. We're far more responsible, and we can actually get the right balance that kind of works for everyone, really, all the stakeholders involved. Is that my don't or my do? Anyway, my second point is I think we can afford to be a lot more innovative and think outside the box in terms of how we approach the style of our marketing. I think there's been some progress made in terms of the content. It's a lot less aggressive, a lot less shouty, less kind of calls to action that I think grated with people, both fans and also policymakers. I think that there's been some progress made on that front and the volume side as well. But I think going beyond that, actually, I think as an industry we're starting to realise that there is definitely an opportunity to use our marketing and our sponsorship in a far more socially responsible way to kind of reposition ourselves as good corporate citizens, and not thinking purely around the kind of commercial side, but actually how do we kind of undo some of the bad sentiments that we build up from people watching football and just getting sick of the same ads at half time? How do we actually say, right, we can curry some favour here? And this is why I quite like to show a small clip now, which is from a Guinness ad, which has been running in the UK recently. Obviously a different sector, but I think it just shows that actually alcohol's been on a probably similar trajectory in the past, and they've actually done, in my view, a very good job of repositioning themselves and actually using, corporate social responsibility to kind of have a positive impact on their brand. So if you could just roll.
A flavor unlike anything else. A look all of its own. Made to a time-honored recipe. What else tastes like it? Nothing. Make it a night you'll remember. With new Guinness Clear.
Thank you for that. I think it's also worth pointing out, given we are here in Amsterdam, that Heineken has done also some outstanding work in promoting moderate consumption of its products. So, David, just want to pick up on the point you made there. So, you seem to be indicating that after a number of years of sort of dominoes falling around the globe against gambling advertising, that the Netherlands may be an opportunity to arrest that and perhaps change the course by showing that gambling can promote itself through sports in a positive way. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've hopefully learnt from those lessons, and when we've kind of got things a bit wrong, but equally, seen what's kind of gone right in other jurisdictions, and under the proviso that there's no outright gambling ban, which I'm hopeful there won't be, at least to start with. To try and take this as an opportunity and win back some support and win back a few of our doubters out there by showing that actually we're not as aggressive as perhaps we used to be, and we actually get it, we understand it, and we can show not just the Dutch public but also regulators in other European jurisdictions, and there's probably some read across to the US as well and other markets internationally as they open. That we can get this right, and we can be trusted, and see it as a kind of a fresh slate, I suppose. That's probably the aspiration, I think.
Yeah, to pick up on that, I think there really is an opportunity, and maybe the Dutch, with the I don't know if you're aware of the polder model, the collaborative culture that was more in labor markets here in the 80s and 90s, I guess. I think the Dutch culture, they have an opportunity at this international time of discussion with Italy on one extreme to really get things right. So I'm optimistic.
Okay, well, it's optimism in short supply in the gambling market at the moment, so that's good to hear. So I think then one of the most interesting developments we've seen in the gambling market around this subject was Kenny Alexander, your boss's announcement a couple of months ago that GVC would no longer, within the UK, advertise around sport and would no longer sponsor British teams. There are some suggestions that, in doing so, he's thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Why did you not choose to say, well, actually, is it too late in Britain? Can we reform the way that we advertise? Can we do a better job of doing it so that we don't have to ban outright? Well, how much of a discussion did you have about that? Yeah,
I think definitely part of the solution is changing that tone, addressing the kind of the volume, and that has been done. But I think the UK, the discussion has almost got to such a point where something slightly more drastic was maybe called for, and I think Kenny's always been not shy of coming forward and being quite bold on that front. So I think it's not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet. This is not going to revolutionise everything, and clearly it's not something I think we would advocate across all markets, because all markets are different. They have a variety of specific context that need to be addressed. And for example, in the Netherlands, there currently is no gambling advertising for many of the operators who will hopefully have licenses in a few years' time. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but I think what it does show is that it's a step in the right direction. The industry is prepared to kind of put its money where its mouth is, so to speak, and make some steps in the right direction. And hopefully, over time, other operators as well will be able to do the same thing, and we can make these kind of more innovative, this kind of, going back to that point about being a bit more innovative and forward-thinking, take those kind of steps in the right direction. So I think that's probably, how I would see it. Okay, thanks. And yeah, when we were talking beforehand, and obviously you're a highly experienced
marketeer with experience in all manner of sectors. When you look at the way that betting companies advertise, how do you think that how in line with it is that with how the general retail world promotes itself? Do you see any big differences there between sports betting adverts and adverts for cars or other consumable goods?
I take your question slightly differently, if I may. When I was selling sponsorship, and looking at all of the sponsor partnerships, the relationship with the betting partner is very different from almost all other all other partners, maybe except for your technical partner, your kit partner, because it really is the only category that effectively that you more or less share the same product. So as a rights holder, what is your product? In the end, the competition that you put on in a match that you allow people to enjoy. The betting sponsor partner, in the end, what he's selling is the possibility to enter, to engage directly with that competition. And that really makes for a very, very rich ground to build upon. I mean, it's all about the same type of values. It's about, I wrote some of them down, it's all about excitement, it's all about competition, it's all about engagement, being involved. You place a bet on that horse, you enter into a relationship with that horse. It's about social, oftentimes, the entertainment, living that with your friends, experiencing that. It's about games, if you will. It's about your knowledge of the situation. So, all of the armchair coaches, the Monday morning coaches, what you know about the game. So there really is so much to build upon in terms of activation, in terms of the type of things that you can do. And if you then reason as a sports right holder, the temptation is here, or in effect what we're seeing sports betting brands, we're seeing them use sponsorship basically as a media channel. They're not talking about a partnership, they're not talking about a brand association, they're basically just using the shirt or the LED boarding or whatever to throw their brands out there and to throw their promotions out there. And as a sports right holder, you should resist that, just as you shouldn't sell your LEDs if you have the possibility, and of course it takes a little bit of prestige as a club to be able to resist that, but you should look for things that build upon the brand association, and that, I think the route is there, looking at the type of things that you can do together, especially also in the digital space, which ever more sports and certainly online betting they share. That is the direction to shoot for, and the direction to avoid is that you're effectively lend yourself as a medium for supermarket promotions, which is a little bit what it seems like.
Okay. One of the things you sort of hinted at there was that sports betting may enhance sports viewing, and I think that's probably something that nobody in a horse racing context would contest, but some people object violently to that notion when it's applied to football particularly. And we used to have one of our big betting brands in Britain, Sky Bet, used as its tagline a few years ago, "It matters more when there's money on it," which is probably true, but feels unpalatable to some people. How do you reflect on that? Is it, I suppose what I'm getting, is it an unhealthy relationship at essence? Is it an unhealthy relationship between football and betting?
I personally think that, I fully agree when David said it's in the end, it's a lot like alcohol, but we're treating sports betting like tobacco. Well, the difference to me is tobacco, there's no real, I say this as an ex-smoker, well, maybe because I'm an ex-smoker, I don't know, there's no positive reason to smoke. But alcohol, let's face it, 90% thereabouts of the people that drink alcohol do so and enjoy so without any problem. more or less same percentage, differs market by market. For sports betting, about 90%, from what I understand, don't have any problem and enjoy placing a bet. But we always focus on the 10%. So I think that's your answer. We should remind ourselves this is an entertainment product, and we let ourselves be pushed, partly because of our own actions, because of the overkill that we put out there as a betting industry. We let ourselves be pushed in the corner, and we're only talking about problem gambling, and we're only talking or match fixing. Let's return to the notion that in the end this is an entertainment product that the vast majority of people enjoy. And yes, placing a bet, if for the vast majority of people, that's a fun thing to do, whether you win or lose.
Okay, thanks. David, on that point then, from a betting operator's perspective, and we've seen the example you gave there with the Guinness advert, but as well as stepping up on harm prevention, what are you guys doing about reminding people this is an enjoyable, fun leisure pursuit that people get a lot of their kicks from? What are you doing to sort of put something else in the other side of the scales?
I think it's going back to what I said about sort of repositioning the way we kind of advertise and the key messaging, which moving away from the purely here's your bonus, bet now, best odds, etc., quite aggressive call to action, which you don't see in many styles of marketing. If you're advertising a car or a holiday, that's not book immediately now, buy this car now. It's more of a kind of a brand awareness kind of thing. So I think that sort of journey towards repositioning our branding, but also obviously there is much more emphasis, and rightly so, on responsible gambling, not just through advertising, but through the entire business operations of the industry now. And we've seen a lot of positive progress made through trade associations and advertising campaigns and research and a whole host of things, and that's hopefully going to continue and to have a really kind of tangible positive effect on not only the small percentage of people that do have gambling problems, but also positioning ourselves as an industry more favourably in the general public and in the policy debate, and generating some more goodwill that we, perhaps through probably fault of our own, have lost a little bit of in the years leading up to now.
Okay, thanks. And I know it's far more interesting when people in the audience are talking, asking questions. It's more interesting for you. So I'll just give you notice. I've got a bunch of questions here for the panelists, but I will come to you in a minute. So if there are any questions, sort of get them prepared, and if there aren't, then we'll just carry on. But so David, on looking at the glass half, the Guinness glass half full perspective, GVC did something very interesting 2 months ago, I think, with regard to its sponsorship of Sunderland Football Club. Do you want to remind the audience of what you did and perhaps what was the thought process behind it?
Yeah, I mean, that was tied into the announcement that we alluded to earlier with regard to a voluntary ban on shirt sponsorships and perimeter advertising for sport in the UK, and the advertising issue as well. And I think, this is not revolutionary, this is not massive, this is not going to tip the industry on its head, but I think it's absolutely a positive gesture to say that where we had a 2-year sponsorship in place with 2 teams in League One, so Charlton and Sunderland. So as of next season, we're going to remove the brand that we were using on the shirt and replace it with a charity partner at no financial cost to the club, as just I think an aspirational gesture that I think is something that could easily be mirrored through other sports, through other operators, and in other guises. It's one of those things. I think potentially in a few years' time, could we get to a situation where for one game a season or one game week a season, every gambling operator supports, that week they have a charity sponsor of their choosing, or something. It's kind of thought-provoking, and it's kind of moving the debate a little bit forward and thinking a bit more innovatively, and hopefully that will continue going forward.
Great. And I know you won't have done it for the recognition, but do you feel that people, do you feel you get credit for you clearly get the punishment in spades when you step out of line as an industry. Do you feel you get the credit when you get things right like that?
I think we get some, but I think because of where we stand in terms of our balance over the last 10 years or so, we're still kind of in negative equity here. So we're not going to be, expecting slaps on the back and lauded universally by everyone. But I think there is recognition that actually that's a good thing. It's a step in the right direction. What else have you got? Keep going. And I think hopefully if we can continue doing that, we can redress some of this balance, this imbalance that's been created, really.
Okay, great. So I warned you that I'd be soliciting questions. Tom was ecstatic about this event, so he's presumably got some. But can I just say, are there any other members of the audience that would like to ask a question of our panelists?
Hi guys, I'm Jaap Kennedy. It's really from the first thing Jaap said, my question. Really interesting word, populism. Kind of touched upon something I was talking about earlier. I mean, my question is, populism kind of as a movement is quite illogical. And I suppose my question is kind of how do you engage with policymakers who maybe don't understand issues, to do with to do with the industry? How do you kind of, from a marketing point of view, how do you answer to something almost so illogical? I guess David's example, I think what the work they're doing at Sunderland, that's probably a good first positive step. But in a more general sense, how do you kind of engage with something, as I say, so illogical?
Ideally, you avoid getting there in the first place. I mean, populism in the end takes popular. No, I need to be watch out not to give a definition because I'm not able to. But I think it often takes existing easy viewpoints out there and latches onto them and builds policy based upon that. So I think the way this is not informed by any studies, but my view on how these populist stances come about is basically what you get. If you have an overkill of advertising, you watch a football match and you see between the sponsors and all of the advertising around it, half or 3/4 of the advertising seems to be for betting brands, and there are probably 10 of them, different ones, around one. So as a viewer, you tend to react, why is there all this advertising? There must be, so they're trying to convince me of something that they're going to make a lot of money on. It's kind of the hidden persuaders type of logic around advertising, to the max. And I think that, that kind of is the breeding ground then to say that, all right, these people are taking advantage of us. If you add to that the talk about problem gambling, it's a very easy logic, a very easy populist logic, if you will, to get to them to say, all right, these people are squeezing the masses with a harmful product. We should stop it. Once you get there, I guess the only way is to combat that with data, to show that in the end, the incidence of problem gambling is more or less the same as the incidence of alcoholism, with the difference that the penetration of alcohol is, of course, a lot higher than that of gambling. So in absolute terms, you're talking about a much smaller problem. The only problem being here in this argument that gambling doesn't have half the penetration of alcohol. Of course, it differs by country, from country to country, and therefore not the social acceptance. So you kind of end up in that loop. But fighting populism with data and facts, we see that in the US. It's not necessarily an easy route. So.
Yeah, populism by its very nature is kind of reactionary. And I think gambling is kind of a good symbol of that almost, because I think, taking the advertising debate, actually, the kind of the policy-led, the evidence based policy making would be based around, is there a public policy issue here? Is it leading to increased issues of problem gambling? And as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been any substantial evidence to support that. However, the more populist issue is, and I think the industry has probably been slow to realise this, is actually the adverts just annoyed people. They just pissed people off. And that's the populism, the populist reaction that kind of manifests itself in a policy change, which is, an MP or a journalist watching a football match with their, at home at the weekend, and they go, God, this is annoying. And then they write about it, and everyone else goes, yeah, this is annoying. And yeah, that's kind of symptomatic, I think, of where gambling is and how it kind of interacts with the populism debate, really.
And David, picking up on that, I guess, and I won't mention who said this, but because I don't want you to say something you regret, but a regulator somewhere in Western Europe recently made the statement that the industry needed to sort out the advertising thing, without really, and fully cognizant that the evidence base around advertising suggests that there are some harms, but they're of relatively low order compared with other things. So when you hear a regulator say, despite the absence of evidence, we would like you to fix this, what sort of goes through your mind? How does that affect how you perceive that organisation?
I think it's just a reality of the industry working. It's just a fact, and I think if you're hearing these statements made publicly by policymakers, by regulators, you need to address it. And I think that whilst that there have been steps made, I think you're seeing it a little bit at the moment in Sweden and Denmark, where I think Sweden is probably quite a good example, where the industry was in the legislation it was described that advertising should be moderate. Without going into any details of what that meant. The industry, because it's so competitive, they've been waiting a long time for the market to open up, kind of overstepped the mark, I think, in terms of the volume. And then all of a sudden now we've got, went with some self-regulatory measures to the Secretary of State. He said, no, this hasn't gone far enough. Now there's a government inquiry with, a realistic chance of, serious prohibitions further down the line. So, I think we just have to be a bit quicker off the mark, and that's why I kind of go back to the Dutch example, where we've been through this process in a number of jurisdictions now. Let's try and get in a position from the word go where we're ahead of the debate and we're not chasing it. So that's probably how I'd like to think we can kind of make some progress.
Okay, thanks. Question down here.
Just like to pick up where you just were just now. From a pragmatic point of view, what would you do or suggest to the foreign and maybe some of the national operators to start working together before Jan 1, 2021? What would your suggestion be?
Yeah, well, I think absolutely it's going to take the trade associations. So there are existing trade associations already in the Netherlands, but learning from those decisions in Sweden and Denmark, they can't make decisions in isolation. I think they need to have, working with the broadcasters and the trade associations in the broadcasting space, media rights holders, the sports themselves. Sports shouldn't, picking up on what Jaap said earlier, I think gone are the days of where you just see what money's on the table, go for the highest bidder, take it, wash your hands of it, and that's done. There needs to be a bit more responsibility around that. But I think the issue is self-regulation I still believe in as a principle, but it needs to be self-regulation which is maybe co-regulation, agreed across all the stakeholders involved, but it also needs to be enforceable and monitored. It can't just be merely, this is what we aim to do, and kind of left alone. There needs to be some sort of mechanism to say that these are our aspirations, these are our targets, and to be held account for them. And I think that can be done. It's not easy. It takes time to get there, and a lot of people need to be involved in those discussions, playing their parts. But I think it is achievable, and that's hopefully what I'd like to see achieved by the industry in the Netherlands going forward.
If I can build upon that, I think the difficulty is exactly that. It's getting the parties around the table and getting the mechanism to work. the things to do, it's not that difficult. I mean, in the end, you want to reduce the quantity, the volume, and you want to reduce the aggressiveness. So, we have examples, the whistle-to-whistle ban, no advertising from the whistle to the whistle. Well, the name says it. So not during the match. One betting brand per advertising break, before or after or during halftime. No direct offers in advertising. No advertising before 9 p.m. to avoid underage exposure. It's not that difficult. I think if you would do those 3-4 things, and I'm sure that David knows much better ones, but you already reduce the exposure and to such a degree that I think you can avoid a lot of the problems. I don't know if you agree. But
No, absolutely. I think it's a combination of factors, but also addressing the content as well and the messaging and around that. And I think if you bring all those things together, you're going to be in a much better position than you would be if you didn't. So,
well, and those mechanisms exist. I mean, to avoid false advertising, you have these committees, and it's very qualitative, but you can put a committee and task them to make sure that you don't get a certain type of messaging out there. So.
Okay, and on that, I think I've got 2 questions for you that are I guess, are related. But one of the issues that has cropped up recently in the UK context is African and Asian facing sports books not directly licensed by our regulator, but able to gain shirt sponsorships, and then BBC revelations about arguably unethical practices in their home markets. And that's posed a question about the level of due diligence that sports rights holders are undertaking with regard to who they allow to put on their shirts, who they sign deals with. So I suppose my question is, one is, are sports rights holders doing enough due diligence? And secondly, can sports rights holders be a force for good by encouraging those with whom they contract to behave better?
Well, clearly they're not doing enough. I mean, if you look at even some of the largest clubs that get, and I'm not even talking about these Asian-facing betting brands, but also enter into partnership deals with fraudulent companies. It happens relatively regularly, and I think on the one hand they're not able to, because sports organizations are huge brands, huge properties, but they're tiny little organizations, so they don't have the capabilities really to do that, and they don't need to either, because in the end they can suffer the little bit of damage that an embarrassing situation like that gives them. I think this whole Asian-facing betting brands, and to some degree regional partners, that you see that as well. I mean, the clubs are being a little cheeky in the sense that they're basically allowing a brand to using their visibility of a sports club, so using content as a vehicle that is going to arrive in a market where they're not allowed to advertise, to still advertise. So a club lends itself to that effectively. What should you do as a club? It's not very proper. I think it's going to end relatively soon because of the whole virtualization, or at least in terms of LEDs, it's going to end because of the virtualization of LED advertising. As you may know, whereas you have now one feed, international feed, those feeds are in some cases, and over the next 1 or 2 or 3 seasons, I think for all of the top leagues in Europe, will be differentiated, and the brands that you see on the LEDs will be different and can be replaced live for the different feeds. So you can have an Asian betting brand in Asia. You can have a European betting brand, or you can, for Audi, if that's your sponsor, you can have Vorsprung durch Technik in Germany, or All'Avanguardia della Tecnologia in Italy, and so forth. When that's the case, regulators in these markets they'll pick up on this relatively quickly, and they'll say, you're sending us this feed here with a brand that is not licensed in our market, or our market is not regulated, but you also have feeds where that brand isn't there. I'm not going to allow you to put that feed on my, to broadcast that feed in my local market. So, at least for the LEDs, that is gonna end relatively soon. And of course, because of all the billboarding that the National League may put on there, etc., etc. So that will end. Shirt replacing virtually shirt sponsors is a little bit more difficult, but yeah.
Okay, so progress through technology then. I think we're heading into stoppage time at the end of the conference. Are there any more questions from the floor? Tom? You've got the Duff mic now.
How broad would self-regulation of advertising need to be, given that if TV sponsorship and sponsorship with rights holders became less effective for gambling brands, they'd probably redirect marketing dollars into digital marketing or another area. And once you're into digital marketing, all of a sudden you're into people's social feeds. You're following people around the internet like Amazon do. It's even harder to track and perhaps even more invasive if it's not done in the right way. So it's kind of a moving target, isn't it? This is one thing that you can fix, and then it might shift somewhere else.
Well, I suppose it sort of goes, I'll let the panelists respond, but I suppose it goes to the point of, at the moment, a lot of the angst around advertising is because it's visible rather than necessarily because it's harmful. And what you're describing is something that may be less visible, but potentially is more harmful. And that may be an unintended consequence of this push. Chaps, have you got any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, it's a totally valid question. It's something that we're kind of, as an industry looking at. I think obviously the immediate focus is around the most obvious ones, which is primarily TV and other, mass media. But clearly, digital, social, these are other channels which we, need to be looked at and are being looked at. And I think technology is a useful tool in that space, given that by their very nature they kind of involve the internet, so harnessing that technology will probably be a useful way of mitigating some of the potential risks. But yeah, clearly it's a challenge that kind of needs to be addressed, and it's encouraging to see in the UK that some of the affiliates, the big affiliate operators, have got together, formed their own trade association, and they're obviously going to be hopefully more organised and willing to discuss these and work more closely with the industry and other regulators, and hopefully that will spread across Europe as well. So clearly more to be done, clearly an issue, but I think that there is definitely an awareness of that, and we're moving in the right direction slowly.
Yeah, and if that comes up, then it's clearly more difficult to regulate that. I mean, one key difference is that it isn't necessarily the vicinity to the core product, which is the live match, is of course, that's the booster, that's the power, that's the impact, that's the audience. So you lose that. Having said that, using those dollars or pounds or euros on the internet, you can really do a lot of communication. So tools for that will probably at that point in time have to be developed as well. But, yeah.
So yeah, I think just to add to that, I think there is, for example, Twitter have certain technologies that can ensure that under 18s aren't allowed to follow certain feeds and these kind of things, and there are screening technology solutions that can help with that as well. So there's going to be reliance on some of those digital operators to kind of play ball as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think you'll also see technology integrated with self-exclusion networks, so you make sure that digital adverts don't reach people who self-exclude and so on. So I think there probably are answers, but yeah.
Great. Well, unless there's any more questions, I think we've reached the end. So I guess just to recap, what we've learned is that the Netherlands is where it all starts. The road to redemption begins right here. So the future's bright, the future's orange.